Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for Monday the 11th of July, and joining me on this edition are Mr. Mark Botwright.
It just popped in there.
News editor Mark Hodgkinson.
Back off, man, I'm a scientist.
Audio reviewer Ed Selley.
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
And assistant editor Steve Withers.
I want you inside me.
Oh.
That's horrible.
Oh, that's horrible.
Well, that's it for the podcast.
Yeah. People have across the land have now switched off, and they now have that image in their head that they will just never be able to get rid of and cleanse.
If you are on public transport and you've thrown up on the person opposite you, please send your invoice to Steve Withers.
See, if they get the sick out, that's the best bit, because it's being sick in your mouth and then swallowing it again. That's the horrible bit. That's the horrible one. You don't want to do that. I've done that on a roller coaster before. Not nice.
It's a lovely start to the podcast, isn't it?
As a child, I had a brilliant idea when I was going to be sick because I was ill, and I said, "Oh shit!" I was like, "Held my mouth shut, not thinking about my nose, and it would just fly my nostrils, which is very pleasant, I can tell you." So, in future, if you're listeners, a handy tip: if you're going to be sick, make sure you close your nose and your mouth,
and then it'll come out your ears,
or somewhere even more unfortunate. Yeah, don't blame me. Blame Ghostbusters for having some really great out of context quotes.
Right. Okay. How do I move on to death from that?
Well, many of us now wish we were.
Unfortunately, 2016 strikes again. If you are a celebrity, we do not blame you if you're now hiding away on some island, tropical island somewhere, and encasing yourself in concrete just in case, because 2016 is certainly out to get the celebs, aren't they, Steve?
Yeah, it is. It's. I mean, I know we joked about it in at various points this year, but it is becoming a bit. I've actually. I saw recently some website did a list of everyone that had died this year so far. I mean, and we're only into July. And, it's such a vast list of celebrities and some quite big names. I'd actually forgotten some of them already because there have been so many more deaths since. But unfortunately, last weekend was yet another terrible weekend for 2016 when we had three notable deaths. Obviously, I'm sure people know that Caroline Aherne died, sadly, at age, I think, 52 or 53, from cancer. I mean, she'd been particularly unlucky in that department because I think this was her third time that she'd had cancer. She was born with eye cancer. So she'd battled cancer on two other occasions, but this time, unfortunately, she didn't survive. And obviously, anyone who's a fan of the Fast Show or Royal Family knows Caroline Aherne. And Mrs. Merton, of course. I mean, she had created some very memorable and classic characters over the last 20 years. And bizarrely was married to Peter Hook from New Order, which was always a bit strange. Particularly when I only knew her as Mrs. Merton and didn't realise she was a lot younger than she appeared on that.
Oh, really? That wig was so obvious. Come on. You got to be
no, I'd never seen her out of makeup, if you know what I mean. I didn't until she started doing things like the Fast Show.
Mrs. Merton, the Fast Show, is so-and-so, but her real success and the one where she really knocked it out of the park and where it was genuinely funny and touching and moving and emotional, and that was the Royal Family.
Never seen it.
Never seen it?
You've never seen that, Steve?
That is such a good programme. It's such a great depiction of the life in the Northwest. I mean, I can associate.
That's one of the reasons why I haven't seen it.
No. It's a bit working class for you, Steve, but honestly, it's so spot on. It's so sharp. It's brilliant.
It's one of those shows where there is, I think, a genuine north-south divide on it.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
Well, yeah, my mother, who grew up in Cumbria, thought it was ace. My dad, who grew up in Plymouth, thought it was absolute shite. So there you go, a genuine representation of that. I thought it was all right by all.
Sorry.
I thought it was all right by all accounts. I think it's one of those programs where actually there were a few truly great moments which we've remembered very, very, very fondly, and ignored the fact that actually it often spent long periods of time not necessarily going anywhere.
Ed,
but
my arse.
My arse.
My arse. No, I think in terms of realism, and Mark will back me up on this one, I knew every single character in that.
Absolutely, 100%.
Knew them inside out, and the realism and the way it came out, it was an outstanding piece of work. It really was.
Yeah, every episode for me, Ed, was an absolute winner. I was in stitches frequently. It was absolutely essential viewing.
Oh, there you go.
This is actually from a place called Timperley, which is where my wife and family are all hail from. So it's it's quite a poignant.
Actually, the show's based on your family.
No, we weren't quite like that, but no, yes, it's it was something I've seen for sure.
It was one of those things that some people just didn't quite click with, though. I think I remember there was a quote. I think it was Noel Gallagher said, "If you're laughing at them, you don't quite get it."
Yeah, totally.
I think that was it.
Yeah, that's well summed up, Noel.
Well, if it had been about apple farmers in the West Country, I might have watched it. But
Or cokeheads.
Cokehead bankers. I think there's got to be a show in there somewhere, isn't there?
I'm sure there's been many.
A comedy, I mean, rather than a serious drama. Although some of those serious dramas are more like comedies if you know anything about actual banking. The kind of the tropes that often get dragged out are complete bullshit. But
so unfortunately that was Caroline Aherne who passed on at 52. Anybody else, Steve?
Yeah, Robin Hardy, who to be fair was a lot older in his 90s, and not exactly prolific. He most famously directed The Wicker Man, which I mean is fair enough. If you're going to do only a few films, making sure one of them is a complete classic is fine. And The Wicker Man is a classic, if not one of the greatest British films, and certainly one of the greatest British horror films.
Well, you see, you're saying that, but I could give you plenty of people who would say the exact opposite and didn't actually.
Don't like The Wicker Man.
Yeah, didn't like it and didn't.
Yeah,
think
no,
it was
I can appreciate there's people that don't. Whether you like The Wicker Man or not, you can generally agree that it is a good and interesting film. But like I said, he didn't do a lot else other than a film called The Fantasist in the mid-'80s. And then unfortunately for him, the last thing he did was in 2011 when he made The Wicker Tree, the follow-up to The Wicker Man, which was dreadful. So maybe The Wicker Man was just a lucky fluke.
But he didn't do the Nicolas Cage Wicker Man.
No.
So his conscience is at least clear in that regard.
Slightly off topic, but one of the greatest comments I've ever seen was on a Guardian comment section on a feminist article where someone used the sequel or the Nicolas Cage Wicker Man as a reference point. And one of the top upvoted comment was, "No, you don't get to use the modern one as the reference for the Wicker Man." And that was all it was.
Well, let's go on to Michael Cimino, who also died at the weekend at the age of 77. It started so well for him. He wrote Silent Running, which is one of my favourite films. He wrote Magnum Force, which I also really like. On the back of Magnum Force, Clint Eastwood hired him to write and direct Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, which I also really enjoyed. And then he went on to make The Deer Hunter, which I've got to say I think is massively overrated, but it was a big success. And then, of course, he went on to make Heaven's Gate and sank an entire studio and his whole career. It sank MGM-UA, although it wasn't the only. I mean, they had other issues. It wasn't just Heaven's Gate, but so that was the last straw as far as the studio was concerned. And it cost about $35 million, which for a Western in 1980, I mean, it cost about the same amount of money as Empire Strikes Back, but clearly Empire Strikes Back was going to make a lot more money. Westerns were never big box office by 1980 anyway, and the idea of doing a Western that cost that much was just crazy. But obviously, on the back of The Deer Hunter, they thought, well, this guy is great, he can do anything. But he went completely bonkers out making that film and just wasted so much money. But having said that, the results are on the screen. It does look stunning. Yeah, so, I mean, I think he showed early promise, but obviously, post Heaven's Gate, his career took a bit of a nosedive. And he never really regained the kind of highs that he obviously had in the 1970s.
Well, people are never going to give you a budget and a film to make once you've sunk a studio and your name's attached to that project, are they? I think your career is more or less dead after that point.
Anyway, so it's very sad to hear about the passing of Caroline Aherne, Robin Hardy, and Michael Cimino.
Mr. Botwright, can we win anything?
Yes, we can. We still have running 5 pairs of Q Acoustics BT3 Bluetooth speakers. That competition is open to all members until the 13th of July.
Excellent. And I'm assuming that we've got no previous competition winners because we named them last week.
Exactly. None.
Good stuff. Right, so let's move on to hardware news, and let's move on to one area of the market which is ready to explode if it hasn't already started its detonation, and that is digital streamers and streaming films to your TV using little media boxes and so on. Mark's our expert. So in terms of growth, it's expanding rapidly.
It is, despite the fact that your smart TVs will do it all for you, and you can do it through your games console or even your set-top box, your PVR. They're showing no signs of slowing down. In fact, quite the opposite. In yearly terms, it's a 15% growth. From 2015 saw a 15% year-on-year growth from 2014, and by 2020. It's expected that 63 million of these units will be shipped worldwide. In Western Europe, in 2015, it was a 50% growth. Now, with the report we got was from Future Source Consulting, who do produce good stuff. and they're attributing it to the rising popularity of OTT streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Video, which is definitely, obviously a significant reason why that will be happening. The Chromecast is the most popular digital media adapter, as they call them. It's got nearly a 20% share of the market. The Amazon Fire is close behind, and that had a 200% growth year on year in 2015 as subscriptions to Prime Video increased. Apple and Roku are the next biggest names in the market, and then basically it's all the Chinese boxes who take up the rest of the market. Now, well, I personally feel, and Futuresource haven't mentioned it in their report as far as I can see, a lot of that is based on the fact that a lot of these boxes are sold ready to stream copyrighted material. So the latest movies, the latest TV series without a subscription, i.e. illegal streaming.
I've got to say, Mark, when I look at my Facebook feed for my naughty friends, they're all talking about their Kodi boxes and so on, and what they're streaming to their TVs, and it's all illegal.
Well, I mean, as part of my work, I have to do a little bit of research. I don't use these movies and TV services, but I know where they are. I know how to get to them. And if you see the amount of Facebook groups and the number of members in those Facebook groups concerned with chatting about this stuff and sharing information on how to do it, it is growing rapidly. I mean, you can see the attraction. You can say, well, you've got basically Netflix, Amazon Prime, Sky Movies all rolled into one, and you're paying very little. These boxes, you can pick them up for 30 quid, get someone to set it up for you, and away you go. So I can understand it, and these things, they spread by word of mouth. I feel a little bit unkind in labeling it all Kodi boxes. Kodi doesn't back getting illegal content. It's just an open source media software for which plugins can be developed if you know a bit of Python, or you can just copy someone's code and link to these file sharing sites.
So you just say if you know a bit of Python?
Yeah, coding.
Not Monty Python.
No, that doesn't really help.
Yeah, the dead
old person.
Yeah, the dead parrot sketch is not going to help you here.
No, it isn't. But you could easily access it. Yeah, so I think there's an awful lot of the reason these interest in these is growing is the fact that you can get the latest movies and the latest TV shows gratis. So I actually had a little bit of further digging just before we started the podcast, and there's a graph, and actually at least 40% of the market is Chinese boxes. So, and if they're all being used, and we can assume a good proportion of them are to get illegal content, then that kind of shows you the state of play.
It's not an area I have a huge amount of experience with, but they do look. I mean, it does seem like absolutely the most logical point for there to be growth. I mean, obviously we do now have 4K Blu-ray, but I think the amount of time it took to get there gave the embryonic versions of these products enough time to get established, if you will. And it just strikes me as a very logical growth area. I mean, it's not predicated around having the wherewithal and the facilities to make quite expensive and bespoke bits of hardware or anything like that. It's generally just software driven. So I think we can look forward to seeing more of them. And sooner or later, once everyone else has been using them for years, and 5-year-olds can do it, I'm sure I'll get one of my own and start having a play.
I guess when you look at it, and you look at it from the studio's point of view, Steve, yes, there is the piracy side of things, which you're always going to struggle to stop that anyway. I mean, every single format we've ever seen for the home, be it VHS, Betamax and onwards, there's always been the piracy side of things, and there's always been, if there's a way of recording it or shoving it over the air or whatever, the pirates are going to exist. But for the studios, there has to be a big section of that where they think, in terms of distribution costs, in terms of making discs and artwork and boxes and all that kind of thing, they can do away with all of that and serve the content quickly. That's going to be a big plus point for the studios going forward.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that the future is streaming, and the studios are going to look at different delivery systems, whether it's day and date delivery between cinemas and also other distribution outlets, or whether it's a move towards streaming content or downloading content as opposed to a disc-based format, which we've got at the moment. I mean, that's definitely that they can cut out the middleman. The sooner they can get it out to consumers and customers, the quicker they get the money back in from the money they've spent on making the film, but also hopefully from their perspective, the less pirating that's going to be going on. But I mean, they're always going to have it. I mean, it's interesting that this is clearly growing, and it's never been easier in many respects to access pirated content online, and yet disc sales are healthy. Cinema, attendances are growing. Box office numbers are rising. Films are regularly making over $1 billion worldwide, even in countries like China, where clearly a lot of this is going on because that's where a lot of the boxes come from. So it's an interesting dichotomy that you're seeing this rise in accessing stuff online, via the internet for free, but also a significant rise in people paying to see content at the cinema. I think that's partly why the cinema has been pushing towards bigger screens, more large format, IMAX, that kind of thing, why 3D came along, immersive audio. There's been a definite push to try and make the cinema experience very different from the home experience in order to get people to go to the cinema. But obviously, we're moving into a world now where you can potentially have an experience at home that's almost as good, if not better, in some aspects.
And if you buy certain manufacturers' products, and we're talking like uber high-end products like from IMAX and Barco and so on, there is a service now where you can buy the film on the day of release in the cinema and watch it in your home theatre for a charge, obviously, and it's quite a charge, but that capability is there as we speak now. So that's another area where we could be moving to day and day release. At the cinema or on your streaming device at home. I guess the other thing, Ed, to mention here is, and I think Top Gear's a good example because Chris Evans stood down this week, because the viewing figures were pretty poor. In the last episode only got 1.9 million viewers, whereas I think the lowest one Clarkson and co ever got was about 5 million. But Evans had a pretty good argument when it comes to the figures, because that doesn't include people who then go to iPlayer and watch it during the week when they have the time to sit down and actually sit and watch the content. And that's got to be a huge number these days. No,
you're absolutely right. And it's working out what the impact of these people is rather, and how that, what the actual final totals are is going to be a real challenge. And then that's if you like, a two-pronged argument. In the specific case of the BBC, who make great pains about the fact that they're not necessarily concerned with revenue per se on a direct program basis, they presumably simply want to know how many people watch the program. In the case of every other broadcaster on earth, it then it's just as important that they have to work out what is the effectiveness of advertising in these diluted non-live segments. I mean, I don't know what your experiences are of this. If you use the on-demand functionality that Sky's got built in, not into Sky Q, the older one, I haven't got Sky Q yet, it's very interesting to see the different takes from channels about how they handle advertising in the on-demand material. Discovery and National Geographic, Discovery have conventional advertising segments embedded in the programs, as do Channel 5 and I believe
Channel 4. Channel 4 does it.
But less adverts than you get.
Channel 4, for me, I thought they just trailered their own programs. They do still have the advertising break, but it doesn't generally go to a third party's commercial. It goes to something.
It depends. It depends what they've sold against the program. I think you'll find the most popular stuff will have advertising running in that place rather than just trailers. The less popular stuff, I don't think advertisers are yet buying the space.
Or it seems to be a Renault advert.
Whereas History Channel, National Geographic, they just essentially run completely without. It runs a 46-minute program. So, I mean, they really have. The real effort now needs to be made into working out what the total numbers are, which is obviously important in the Evans sense of the word, but also what are the commercial implications and so on and so forth, because none of us are exactly huge fans of advertising, although I will say that James Blunt lottery one is genius. I thought that was genuinely funny.
But he's a genuinely funny guy. I actually really quite like
funny
him.
Guy. Yeah. But there has to be means of ensuring that these second segment, third segment viewers are still, there's still some commercial gain to it it being watched under those circumstances, which is why I dare say the conventional Nielsen ratings still have the sway that they do, because you do know that advertising is, happening in real time, so to speak.
I know we've discussed this plenty of times in the past, but I think it gets more and more obvious as time goes on. I mean, I no longer watch anything other than the news in real time broadcast. Everything I watch,
sporting events, I suppose, sometimes.
Even the Euros, I've been really disinterested. I think it was because I watched the England game and it really put me off.
Fair enough. Crap.
And I even missed the Welsh game the other night. But I would say the vast majority of my viewing is done on catch up or via iPlayer or other on demand stuff or via Netflix or whatever. I do not watch live TV other than the news at 1 o'clock on an afternoon and 6 o'clock on an evening.
I don't know. I do watch some. I mean, I was doing Game of Thrones at 9 p.m. on a Monday when it happened. There was nothing else. That was simply a means of limiting my spoiler sort of exposure time as much as humanly possible. And I don't know. I mean, I still watch. It's interesting. I mean, for example, I mean, I have no great interest in cycling, but I do like watching. I've said this before. I like watching cycling coverage on Eurosport, and actually, I find that often I'm watching quite a lot of that live. Although I guess that's not necessarily time critical, and it's also a bit of a pig to watch after the event. So I'd still say I'm watching a fair bit of stuff in a scheduled sense of the word.
I think there are certain programs where it's either live or on first showing, where it almost ties in with like social media, or it's a kind of social experience. People want to watch something as it happens. But other than that, there's such a kind of small section of programming. Other than that, you can watch everything else on catch up, and it makes no difference.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I discovered watching the football, which was like Phil. I mean, apart from the news and sporting events, I don't really watch anything live. And what I tend to do is just program the PVR on a Saturday morning with a TV guide to all the things I want to see during the week, and then just watch them as and when I want to. Which is specifically the case with anything on commercial TV, because I will not sit through advert breaks. So basically, I just record it and then just skip over the advert breaks. So I haven't seen any adverts. The only time I ever see adverts is if it's a football match or something like that on ITV. And for some strange reason, all the games I wanted to watch almost entirely bar one were annoyingly on ITV. So I had to sit through their crap commentary, but also advert breaks. And I suddenly thought I haven't seen any adverts for ages. So I hadn't seen things like the James Blunt advert until watching the football. And all the ones with, what's his face? Alec Baldwin, the Alec Baldwin adverts, which are quite funny. And the ones with Ryan Reynolds.
I think the radio one and the online ones are actually better than the ones running on the TV, to be honest.
Now, radio advertising is something I simply cannot do. Television advertising, I accept as a necessary evil. I cannot listen to commercial radio. It's as simple as that. It just doesn't happen. Just radio advertising is the seventh circle of hell, as far as I'm concerned. I just cannot stand it. Will not listen to it. Will not bother. I haven't listened to a non-BBC radio station or internet radio station in at least a decade.
Well, you're missing out on some good stuff.
Well, I'm sure they come up with the most annoying jingles for radio because they've only got the one medium.
It's just I don't know. There's a banality to it which leaves me just irrationally angry, like so many things in this world. But I just know, as I say, I haven't listened to a commercial radio station in yes, it's got to be 10 years.
I like the legal disclaimers on radio adverts, but they have to say something and they have to say all of it, but they try and say it as quickly as possible, so they get somebody.
Well, because time is money. They're paying for a 30-second slot or a 15-second slot.
I do like
your home is at risk if you do not keep up with repayments.
Yeah, but they say it at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, they do it really, really fast, so you can almost not quite understand it.
The best one are like the car lease things, because they've got to say so many things about it, and you will not own this car, blah, 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 the APR, and you can just pick out various words because they're saying it so quickly.
I like the adverts, though, for during international football tournaments, because you see how much confidence a particular business has in how far England will go. There's always that sad moment where you've got the England advert and it's like a week after they've gone out.
Well, the worst
you're
for
still
that
paying
one.
for this.
the worst for that was the Rugby World Cup, because let's face it, there was much more faith that the England rugby team were going to do reasonably well in the tournament. So yeah, England rugby adverts lingered long and painfully after the event when the team had been unceremoniously dismissed. By the same token, I am a big fan of some of the Eurosport adverts, which are clearly booked internationally. So they don't go. They either have no spoken dialogue at all to save money, or it's clearly just done on sort of overdubbed captions and stuff. So I find those momentarily entertaining, as well as heavily overdubbed sort of cleaning advert. You know, the ones that you get for not Silitbang, Flash and things like that, where the woman is very clearly speaking in either Dutch or German.
Yeah,
and it's been heavily done in English.
If there's ever an advert which would drive me to murder, it's the Haribo adverts.
What, when they're speaking with a kid's voice?
Yeah.
Do you know what? That doesn't make me that angry.
Oh, it did.
Money Supermarket one makes me angry.
The dancing blokes?
Dancing blokes. There's just something strange about it. It's like something out of Videodrome.
You'll start developing tumours.
Yay.
Segue from that.
And on that happy note.
Right, so obviously streaming, and we're talking about TV, movies, all that kind of thing. It's getting bigger and bigger, Mark. So in terms of best out there, what should people, if they haven't got a streamer and they're looking for a nice little box, what should they be looking at?
Well, you've got to prioritise your needs first. So do you want just a straight media player that doesn't have access to Netflix, Amazon and the rest of it? Or do you want something to organise your locally stored media? Or do you want a combination of both? So there's a few. My favourite's probably the Shield, the NVIDIA Android Shield TV, that is. That does 4K and HDR Netflix update this week, so it does HDR playback now. It does Kodi very, very well. It's a very slick box. It's got a lovely little remote. It's very powerful. It's quite well future-proofed. It's got no problem with 4K, as I say, in HDR. That's an excellent box. Similarly, just for a straight media player based on Android, I would go for the Minix U1 or maybe the WeTech Core, which has access at least to full HD Netflix and at correct frame rates and output signal. Then you've got things like the Popcorn Hour, and there's a PT, which is really just strictly for your local media, and they play almost everything. I mean, virtually everything you can think of, including high-res audio files. Similarly, the High Media Q10 kind of falls into that bracket, although it's got a few little problems. Then you can look at something like the Raspberry Pi 3. That's a very cheap little box that will play, again, almost anything you care to throw at it. And for something more conventional, just for your access to your catch-up services and your Netflix and your Amazons, the Roku's very hard to beat. The Fire TV is also very good.
I love my Roku 3 and my Fire TV 4K boxes. They're brilliant.
They've just got everything, haven't they? And they're dead simple to use.
Yeah.
And arguably, although I've not had one because Apple don't supply review samples, the Apple TV 4 looks pretty impressive. So yeah, it's a case of just weighing up what you need, and then, do you need 3D? That's a bit of a problem area for media streamers. Do you need HD audio, pass through, and all this kind of stuff? I mean, if your needs are simple, you can do it very, very cheaply. When you start getting a bit more exotic, then you have to spend a bit more.
I think we've all got simple needs on this podcast, I think
so. But you're not including 4K and HDR, those. Obviously.
Right, okay. Moving on. You've got Netflix, you've got Amazon, you're sitting there, you're flicking through all the different pages. I find myself doing this. I sit down and I think, I fancy watching something, and then 20 minutes later, there's just too much choice ahead, and I've given up, and I don't know what to pick because there's just so many things, and I think, well, I'd like to watch that, but I'm going to watch that later. Well, I'd like to watch that, but I'm going to watch that later. And I never end up picking anything to watch, and I believe that it's actually a medical condition.
Yes, indeed, Phil. You are apparently suffering from chronic movie browsing dysfunction. The extreme inability to swiftly find anything good to watch on the various services open to you. And yes, you're not alone in this. The average American spends 19 minutes a day browsing aimlessly for something to watch, which I think actually sounds a bit low.
I didn't think they had that attention span. 19 minutes.
Well, let's be nice. And that's 9.5 hours a month, 115 hours lost per year, and 377 days lost in a lifetime to the horrors of CMBD. And I can't imagine that this that the UK is too far behind them in those statistics. And furthermore, for those of us that don't live alone, we know that CMDB also becomes a cumulative effort. So when there's more than one of you choosing what to watch, you then start to run into the issues of you might be quite up for something, but the CMDB on somebody else just isn't loving it. So actually, you can end up losing an entire evening to just aimlessly flicking through various guides, going, I just don't want to watch that.
But that could apply to anything though, not just looking for something to watch when there's somebody else involved. And they're not really up for it.
There are ways and means of dealing with. Obviously, would you like to go out to eat at a restaurant? Yes. What did you have in mind? Oh, I don't know. You pick something. So then you reel through the 28 options, and actually there was something in mind from the outset. So I generally find that when you are married to a vegetarian, as I am, it's like, oh, I can't decide. You pick something. Fine, we're going out for steak. So that generally, I find, prompts my fragrant wife to perhaps put more input into where she might want to eat. So I can head that off at the pass. Whereas with chronic movie browsing dysfunction, oh, I don't know, you choose. It's like, fine, I'm going to watch some hardcore pornography. A, that's not on the same list of things, and B, it just doesn't have quite the same ability to jolt the other person out of their inability to choose something.
No, so what you should say is, right, let's Smurfs 2 it is then. That'd get a reaction.
Just use the Adam Sandler option now that Netflix seems to be making all of his films. It's just like, right, we're watching a new Adam Sandler.
Anybody else suffer for this?
Sorry.
I used to, but I'm quite disciplined with it now. I know what I'm going to watch before I go in there these days, and I'm quite organised with it. But yeah, I kind of sympathise with people who could just spend hours and hours flicking through.
The thing for me is music services like Tidal. Not so much Netflix, because Netflix I'll usually pick something or I'll go and watch something on iPlayer or something like that. I'll sort myself out. But music services, because I'm not in touch with the youth of today.
Down with the kids.
Down with the kids. No, it's trendy or whatever. What I tend to find is I'll have a quick browse around. I can't find anything I really want to start listening to, and I go back to my old tat that I know.
Yeah, I'm pretty much like that.
I've got 10,000 songs, but I only listen to 6.
Yeah.
The same 6.
Do you just have Tidal these days, Phil, or do you have
just Tidal?
Because I have to say that the Spotify Discover Weekly, it has some weeks where it's useless, but most of the time it will at least bring me bring an artist to my attention that I wasn't previously aware of, and I can spend some time digging into that and taking it from there. But yes, I mean, I have to say Tidal's playlists don't necessarily give me the jumping off point because they're very structured. I either end up listening to a playlist where I already know all of the tracks, or it's a real step off into the unknown, and often that's not terribly successful. I have to say I don't have a browsing dysfunction with streaming services. But that said, my hardware is slightly different to yours. If I can't decide what I'm going to listen to on a streaming service, I'll put a record on. And that obviously
but that's you still going back to your old
tat. You have to select a record then, isn't that the same kind of situation?
I find, for whatever reason, I find that a much easier thing to do.
There used to be the old 70s thing, 60s and 70s thing, where people would buy a album based on the cover art.
Yeah, well, Kirsten, my wife, has periodically done that in the past, which led to some fascinating results. Actually, if you are having a huge issue with this, with music, I can't help you with streaming services. If you had the time and the willingness to input your collection into the Discogs library, so you can use Discogs to actually catalogue your own music, be it on vinyl, be it on download, be it however, it then has a function where you can ask it to choose something to listen to, and it will just select something at random. So if you are that indecisive, you can hand over the decision-making prowess to the internet, and it will do it for you.
Okay.
Couldn't you just spin around 5 times and then point your finger at your record collection and
Well,
see which
as
what
I
it
said,
hits?
I don't have this issue. I very rarely need to look at my record collection for more than 90 seconds before I go, do you know what? I'm listening to that today. Bosh. Good to go. And it must be said, as I was saying last week, in terms of indecision, with all of the Star Treks on Netflix at the moment, if for whatever reason I can't decide on something to watch, I'll just pick a Star Trek episode.
Now, you see, the biggest problem here, and I alluded to it right back at the start when I was saying about going through Netflix and looking for stuff to watch and saying, yeah, I'll watch that later, I'll watch that later, I'll watch that
It's
later.
that you don't.
You don't get back to it, or when you remember that, oh yeah, that's on Netflix, and you go looking for it again, it's now gone, because the thing with Netflix, and to Amazon to an extent, is, well, with Amazon, they're only free on Prime for a certain amount of time before they then go to paid content, and then with Netflix, the stuff disappears.
Yeah.
There is a website that tells you when stuff is going, though, isn't there?
There is, yeah, but I think the annoying thing is that it does disappear, and it's always on the day that you want to go and watch the certain thing, and it's gone.
Yeah, I'm pleased to say that my Blu-ray collection has never started to charge me money to watch something again, and neither has something suddenly disappeared, unless I've been robbed, of course, in which case it probably would.
The funniest thing with Amazon was that there was the latest Metallica film was on there. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was really well done. It had movie parts, and it was also a live performance, and the soundtrack was fantastic on it. I watched that twice, and then when I went back to watch it a third time, it wanted to charge me. So there's that as well. You can't repeat view stuff.
Wait a minute, you've got a pile of discs as high as the ceiling of things you haven't watched, and you went and watched it twice, and we're going back for thirds.
Yep.
Well, this is the thing. In the face of infinite choice, we do often regress to just into comfort zone stuff. You know, I mean, it's in the same way that I've got that new jazz trumpeter. That is it, Kamasi Washington. I can't remember the bloke's name. It's slightly embarrassing. I have bought that on recommendation. I listened to about a few minutes of it on Tidal. I still haven't got around to listen to that because it's one of those. I can't just put it on in the background. I'll actually need to concentrate to listen to that. So I imagine I'll get round to that sometime before Christmas, but I don't know exactly when that will be. So I'm not immune from this in an audio sense of the word.
Well, this affects me with practically all types of media. I'm absolutely the same with games, a huge backlog. I've got a bookshelf that's kind of creaking, and the only way I can select books is largely by which ones I want to get rid of. So the ones that I actually want to read, I leave. So I can just get rid of stuff. And with browsing things, I can just spend too long looking. And the trouble is, when you get to that stage, then you start to almost kind of, it becomes like a feedback loop. You start to look inward and say, well, what am I in the mood for? And then you try to select something based on mood rather than just choosing something and watching it. And particularly with music, I mean, I do find the Spotify kind of curated playlists are very good. But the trouble is, I tend to listen to something whilst doing something else. And as Ed says, when it's something new, you tend to assume that it doesn't, you have to concentrate on it. So therefore you end up going back to something that you can just have on in the background, which isn't really conducive to discovering anything new.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess there's CMDB, but are there other conditions, Ed, that maybe our listeners are not suffering from that, but they could be suffering from other conditions?
There are apparently, yes. Just let me return to where we are. There are some other issues that are being identified, yet to be formally sort of recognised, but there's that critically acclaimed movie sucks disorder, TCAM-SD, and we can't agree what to watch syndrome, which is, as I was alluding to earlier, is if you like a compound multiple brain version of CMBD. So yeah, it's unfortunately, as our choices grow exponentially and we have limitless media available at our fingertips, I think the lesson we're drawing from this is that we're actually just going to watch the same old shit over and over again.
Well, sometimes it's comforting to go back to an old friend, isn't it, Steve? I mean, Steve, you're the person on the podcast here who watches new movies all the time. You're either going to cinema or on disc, but there's nothing more comforting sometimes than just going back to an old friend, something that you know really well.
It's like a comfortable pair of slippers, isn't it? You like to slip back into it every now and then, relax, watch something. I think certain media lends itself to that. I'm not sure about Mark B could probably comment on this, but I couldn't play the same game over and over again but you can. And I don't really tend to read books over and over again, although I know some people do. My wife will read the same book over and over again, but I rarely do. But I will happily watch the same film over and over again, even if I love that film. Whereas a lot of people, I know lots of people who basically will watch a film once and that's it. They never watch a film a second time. Whereas I will, and I'm sure, whereas I'm sure, Phil, you've rewatched not films multiple times, and obviously Mark B's watched Shogun Assassin hundreds of times now, is it? And obviously music you can listen to over and over again as well.
Computer games is a weird one. I don't know. Modern computer games, they don't necessarily have the revisit factor, but there are certain older ones, and where the simple mind clearing joy of completing them in an hour or so, I found to be tremendously, almost sort of zen calming. I can't speak for anyone else here, but I always found that was the case for certain games of mine.
Yeah, based on kind of slightly different mechanics. They used to be based far more on the idea of like flow gaming and simple repetition of tasks and things like that. Whereas now you will get kind of an hour-long intro, which is a narrative, and you're forced to kind of walk along with another character, and then you get lots of text telling you what every button does, and it just, or something like that. Everything's kind of pushing more towards narrative these days in games, which is why I don't tend to replay modern games, simply because it's such a kind of investment of time, and the repetition doesn't really kind of click in the same way that I could still pick up something like Star Fox on the SNES or something and just fall straight back into it.
Yeah, Rick Dangerous on the Amiga, things like that. Just they take about 35 minutes to do, and they're just fabulous. It's just so mind clearing. And I mean, obviously, puzzle games are always great. I mean, Lemmings and so on and so forth was always ideal for that sort of thing. But I do get what you're saying, Steve. And I have to say, I'm not a big movie rewatcher. There are certain films which I will go back to, but in the pressures on my time that I have, I'll generally if I'm just going to go for something familiar, I'll just go back to music. But we are all different.
You see, for this won't transfer over to our listeners, but certainly it'll transfer over to us on here because we review items. There's very rarely I'll sit down and watch something I haven't ever seen before on a bit of equipment, because a lot of the time the equipment's maybe not up to the task. I'm sure there's a few of us on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not going to name any products here, but there was a series I was watching on Netflix called Bloodline, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And yeah, I watched the last 2 episodes on a subpar TV, and it really ruined it for me. And I wished I hadn't done it now. Yeah,
I would likewise. Budget projectors. There's nothing against budget projectors. They have their place. They do a role, and they're very suitable to different things, different environments, and so on. But if I'm watching something on a projector in my cinema room, then I want really, really, really good picture quality. To do justice to the fact that it's a blacked out room and it's got a big screen, all this. I have to watch stuff I've watched before on the stuff that comes in for review, because I don't want to ruin the experience of watching something I've never seen before on a subpar piece of equipment.
Yeah. Plus, also, if it's something you've seen multiple times, you've got a point of reference, haven't you, Phil, for testing.
Well, I mean, obviously, we do that anyway. So we have all our set clips that we go through. Any bit of new kit that comes through it, they always get fed the same clips. Stuff where we've actually sat down with people who created the content, so we know what it should look like. So a good example of that is Mike Soa, who did Oblivion. I've actually sat down with Mike, and he's shown different scenes and said this is what it should look like. So having reference points like that is absolutely vital when it comes to testing equipment. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is I fancy watching this new Blu-ray, or the Blu-ray that's been sat in the pile for 6 months to get watched. I don't fancy watching it on a subpar piece of equipment.
No, it'd be a bit like, if you test cars for a living, you might want to nip down the shops in a micro, but if you're going to go for a long drive and you've got the option of driving in a really nice car, you'll probably pick that one instead. Not that I've got anything against micros, obviously, but
but micros are the bane of every driver's life on the road. If anybody's going to cause an accident, it's a woman in a micro.
I don't know, the original micro, the K13 one. It was always amusing that if the weather was dry, it was the car you'd always be stuck behind. The moment it snowed, it's by far and away the most most capable vehicle in the UK at getting through snow on roads, even more so than 4x4s, because it weighs nothing and it has tyres that are an inch wide. But yes, I sort of agree with the sentiment. I don't know. The problem is that since Rover went under, the sort of spread of vehicles potentially being used by people for whom driving is a secondary interest is very, very wide.
It's still two Nissan cars for me. It's the Micra and the Duke.
Well, yeah, I don't know. There are some other candidates as well, as far as I'm concerned. But
well, come on, you got to name them so we can test your theory.
If you see someone driving a Hyundai, the small Hyundais,
the i10s.
Yeah, things like that. That does not scream "I am a petrol head," does it? Any Peugeot of any description. If you've chosen to buy a Peugeot in the last 10 years, again, your interest in the internal combustion engine is strictly peripheral. And I've not necessarily seen a rent what's the Capture, the little Clio sort of SUV. I've not seen one of those driven in a manner that suggests that the driver is actually remotely interested in what they do.
When they sell the car on the fact that it has padded doors and padded bumpers and stuff like that, you know that's going to appeal to the type of driver who's going to pull up next to you in the supermarket and slam their door inside your car because theirs is padded.
But are we talking about the Citroen Cactus here?
The Cactus, yeah, sorry. I meant to say the Cactus.
You see, the thing is, I have now driven one of those, and it was surprisingly hilarious.
Yeah, but it's for people who can't drive and who hit things, though.
Well, I'll take that on the chin. I have to say, I think as a piece of engineering, it's brilliant. Really, and it's because it weighs nothing. It's much faster than you'd expect it is. So yeah, I'd quite happily consider one of those. And yeah, I'd open my doors in car parks with reckless abandon, but only if I'm next to Audis.
Yeah, you're the type of person I hate.
Yeah. Is this a new section called "Who Can We Insult"?
Well, I think we've managed to insult most of the population in this podcast so far.
Can I just say I have chosen to embrace my my personal CMBD. I just basically go into Netflix or whatever and then randomly select something if I haven't seen it. Basically, does that
mean you end up watching the log fire quite a lot?
Well, you do often end up with the suffering from TCAMSD because you think, oh, that's a classic film. I watched that. Oh, that was bollocks. So yeah, there is. I'm not saying it's foolproof, and it is dangerous because you can often end up wasting an hour and a half on something that's absolute trite. But occasionally, very occasionly, you discover an absolute gem. So,
but Steve, are you doing that on the projector or are you doing that on the TV in the living room?
Tell you, I'm not wasting bulb life on rubbish. The projector only gets used for absolute top quality stuff because, you know, as you'll know well know, Phil, you know, bulb life is with a projector when you're using a lamp is critical. So yeah, I don't waste bulb time on anything that's not top drawer.
Okay, don't waste bulb time on shit.
No,
sounds like an AV T-shirt.
That was a waste of bulb time.
Oh, that's it. You're going to have to make AVForums T-shirts that say that.
A waste of bulb time. Well, I suppose I could have a different version. I wore out my stylus for this ? Maybe with a picture of Morrissey underneath it.
Oh yeah, the king of the hipsters, Morrissey.
I like the Smiths.
Okay, so getting back to some kind of relevance to this podcast, we've been talking about Tidal. Now, there is a lot going on at the moment with Tidal. Ed, just explain it quickly.
Well, now, I need to add that there is a rider to this, that when people who actually work for Tidal have been spoken to, none of them are any the wiser about this. This appears to be information generated from outside of Tidal, but there is increasing column inches, if nothing else, that the service stands to be acquired by another party, and that other party could well be Apple. I mean, certainly there is evidence there. It would appear that Jay-Z and his selection of fabulous musician friends aren't necessarily happy with the returns that the service is providing. But nonetheless, it's a bit of an unusual undertaking for a streaming service of the nature of Apple Music to suddenly want a completely different streaming service. But there are, I suppose, if you will, there are some sort of logical advantages to it, in so much as it would allow Apple Music, who it would appear have got some significant interface changes for their sort of web, their desktop browser and so on and so forth in the offing to make that experience better. I mean, I have to say that it could get much worse, and that would allow them to keep pushing Apple Music as as their sort of Spotify competitor to their mass market option, and whether they could then use Tidal differently as a separate undertaking is open. Is, you know, that's a source of debate. There are some, obviously, just as there are some perceived advantages, there are some significant questions that would need to be answered. I mean, obviously, Tidal's library by and large is stored in FLAC, free lossless audio codec. This is not a format that Apple products will natively do a great deal with, so that would be an interesting one to sort out. But if Apple is still interested, as they said in the original launch of Apple Music, of their relationship with the artist and the user's relationship with the artist, Tidal strikes me as the better platform to do that on, while allowing Apple Music to presumably hunt down and finally crush Spotify. However undesirable that might be to those of us who have products with extensive third-party Spotify support.
Wasn't there a bit of a row with, I'm just slightly off topic, but a row with Apple and Spotify earlier this week about them charging $3 for to install it via your iDevice, whereas if you go to your web browser and subscribe, it's $3 less a month. Is that right?
As I understand it, this is something to do with how you sign up and so on and so forth. Although I don't, whilst I have some sympathy for Spotify, I don't, Apple has, I believe, had these rules in place for as long as there has been an app store. And also, there's absolutely nothing stopping Spotify from saying, if you take 3 minutes out from your valuable life to do this on a desktop computer, it will cost you less money, and your subscription will activate on any location that you're currently logged in on. So it's a power play, if you will, and it's Spotify, pushing the boundaries of what they can do. I suppose they must be feeling it keenly, because let's face it, if you buy an iDevice, Apple Music is there. It's pre-installed. It's good to go. And I dare say that they can feel more aggrieved about additional subscription costs with that now being the case than they might have otherwise done beforehand, where yes, you were being charged more if you're doing it through the the Apple Store, but so were all of the other services that were also using that platform. I mean, I guess they have some argument that those charges aren't going to be extant on Apple Music because the software is already there.
Well, this is one that seems going to rumble on and on, so we'll definitely be coming back to this one. But as time is pushing us on, we need to move on. We need to move to movie news next. So, what's at the cinema, Steve?
Cinema this week we have Now You See Me 2, obviously the sequel to Now You See Me. Now, the original film I really liked. I thought it was great fun. I know that some people have complained about some of the magic being basically just science fiction, and that is true to a certain extent. It probably done with a bit more practical magic and a bit less sci-fi tech. But I still thought it was good fun. I thought it was well made. I enjoyed the cast, really great cast. Jesse Eisenberg, Mark Ruffalo, Woody Harrelson, I thought were all great. Morgan Freeman, Michael Caine's a great cast. I really enjoyed it, and it did quite well at box office. So inevitably, there's been a sequel. Again, they brought back the original cast, except for the actress who was in the first film, which was Ilsa Fisher. She's pregnant, so they've replaced her with Lizzie Kaplan, who actually I really like. So I think she's a good addition to the cast. They've also brought in Daniel Radcliffe, who actually I think is really good in it. And again, I really enjoyed it. I think it's more of the same, basically. There's a lot more practical magic in this, which I quite like, the fact they've gone for more practical magic. They've done some quite nice tricks in it. Some of the conclusion, the denouement is a bit obvious, I think, ultimately, but overall, it retained the sense of fun, lightness, combining sort of heists with magic and tricks and illusions and a bit of hypnotism as well. The cast is enjoyable and fun. The additions to the cast are great, and overall, I thought I gave the original film an 8 out of 10, which I think a lot of people probably think is generous. But this was reviewed earlier in the week by Sharuna. She gave that 8 out of 10, and I agree with her. I think Now You See Me Too is great fun. It's an enjoyable 2 hours at the movies. Turn your brain off, sit back, have a laugh. Some of the plot twists are quite good fun. Some are a bit more obvious, but 8 out of 10 from me as well. I thought it was great fun.
One of my wife's pupils is in it as well. And,
oh, really?
Yes. I haven't seen the film, but there is a street scene, and there is someone drumming in a street scene. And
yes.
That's one of my wife's.
He gets quite prominent exposure in that scene, actually.
Yeah. So there you are. Tomorrow the World or whatever. So
okay, so there you go. Go and watch it just for that.
Yeah,
just for
absolutely.
That scene. Yeah. Okay, and obviously this review's been on the site for a long time. By the time you come to read, time you listen to this podcast, it's probably a fair bit down the homepage, because this is another one of these, release it on a Monday, hoping to have a big weekend.
Yeah, there's definitely a trend. It's kind of, I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you release any day other than the Friday, it's considered to be opening weekend box office. So films are opening, some films have even opened on a Saturday, so that number from Saturday to the following Sunday is considered to be the opening box office weekend. It's a way of boosting their numbers, but there's a bit of a trend for it now. And interestingly, not only Now You See Me Too opened on Monday of the previous week, but for those of you listening on Monday of this week, Ghostbusters opens on a Monday as well, opens on the 11th of July rather than the Friday. Again, an attempt to boost numbers. I always suspect when films do that, the studio are not 100% sure about the opening box office that it's going to be that popular. And so they do it as a fiddle. And, there has been some negative comments about Ghostbusters, particularly after the first trailer was released. So that opens this week on Monday, today, if you're listening to it on the day the podcast goes up. And then on Friday, we also got Ice Age Collision Course.
So the next few weeks at the cinema are going to be these types of movies, because it's the school holidays, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of kids' films. So that for those that have been living in a cave for the last few months, Ghostbusters is obviously a remake, or not. I don't know if it's a remake or a sequel, but it's essentially Ghostbusters with a female cast, and Chris Hemsworth playing the secretary. The first trailer didn't look good. Later trailers have looked better. Some of it looked a bit more funny. It's a good cast. No one can question the comic abilities of the ladies that they've chosen to play the Ghostbusters, or Paul Feig, the director, who's also made things like Bridesmaids and The Heat and Spy. So Melissa McCarthy and Kristen Wiig are heading it up, and they've certainly got a good pedigree. So I'm sure it won't be as dire as that first trailer suggested, but certainly there has been some negative feedback, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's opening on a Monday rather than on a Friday. Ice Age Collision Course, I don't know. I mean, there's already been 4 of these films. Did we need a 5th? I'm not so sure. And I know the box office has been gradually decreasing since a peak with the 3rd one. I think it did very well. But yes, we got another Ice Age movie, which means more of Scrat running around with his hazelnut.
Joe can only go so far, really, can it? And if the kids were 3 when they seen the first film, how old are they now?
They're going to be like about 18, I think, at this point.
And of course, that
brings
us on to the Blu-ray releases. Kung Fu Panda 3 now. I've seen the original one. It was a great demo disc, fantastic soundtrack, but I haven't seen any of the others. Are they worth it?
I've seen the first 2, which I did enjoy. I thought the first one was great. Second one actually was pretty good too. I have not seen Kung Fu Panda 3. Again, I think I'm getting a bit of fatigue now in terms of, and we're going to come back to the subject in a minute, but so many sequels. There's just sequels and reboots and remakes and reimaginings, and Kung Fu Panda 3, I couldn't be bothered really with it. But it comes out on disc today if you're interested in seeing it. We've also got Allegiant, which is the 3rd film in the Divergent series, or the Detergent series, as I like to call it. That really did tank at the box office. So there's been, obviously that one's really, they were planning on doing a 4th film. Whether they're still going to, I don't know, because it hasn't had the same kind of returns as the first 2 movies. Obviously, even tweens can get bored of something. We do also have Anomalisa, which at least is an original film. Well, at least it's based on the stage play, actually, but it's puppet animation, directed by and written by Charlie Kaufman, who also wrote things like Being John Malkovich. So you can imagine it's going to be a bit strange. In it, it's got David Thewlis and Jennifer Jason Leigh, I believe it is, doing the man and woman who are the main characters. all the other voices in the entire thing are done by another actor, including the women's voices. So he's doing all the other voices in it, which is a bit strange. But that apparently is how it was done on stage as well. It's Tom Newland is doing all the other voices. Anyway, it's Kaufman, so you can imagine it's going to be a bit strange, but it does look interesting. And at least it's an original film; it's not just a sequel or a tween or a young adult book or something like that. And the other, and for me personally, the big release this week, the one I'm actually most looking forward to, is there's a new Blu-ray release of Highlander based on a new 4K remaster or restoration of the original negative. So I'm looking forward to that because I do really enjoy Highlander. I know it's silly, but it's fun, and back then,
it's one of those films for me that would always look best on VHS because that's the format that I saw it on first of all. But
so
that's
4:3 pan and scan tram lines.
That actually recorded off the television with
the advert breaks edited out,
or not so carefully edited out in the case of my dad. But that would be that's how Highlander should be seen, frankly.
Okay, we'll take your word for that one on Ed. Right, so very quickly, you mentioned original films and how rare they are, and we keep coming back to this. There's so many comic book superhero movies and old franchises being remastered and rebooted, and we've got another Bond coming along. Is it not about time we killed him off and that type of thing? We've got all these arguments, but the thing is. And Steve asked the question, what are the best original films that you've seen in the last 10 years? And I cannot think for the life of me. I'm sure I have seen some, I'm sure I've raved about some, but none are actually coming straight to mind at the minute.
I'm glad you said that because I've got the same problem entirely. Yeah.
I think it's been a fairly decent decade.
I don't necessarily. I don't know. We've had some. And this lives or dies on originality, in so much as, for the most part, if we are locked into using humans on Earth, the chances are that every single film released henceforth will at least have to pay some level of lip service to films that have gone before. But one that stood out to me as just a film about a concept which I'd not seen anything about previously and that I thought was really good was Nightcrawler.
That was good. That was really good.
That was a great film.
And
I thought very prescient too. It really does lift lid on the sick, twisted nature of modern news broadcasting, particularly, and the way that it chases ambulances and the stuff that they get away with now that would never have happened in the past.
And I don't think that you could claim easily that it's derivative of a single film. I mean, it obviously it takes from Drive, it takes from other things as well. But I thought it was a genuinely excellent film to watch, and it doesn't have much in common with things that have gone before. So that would be my candidate.
It's not the last 10 years, but for tackling something that hadn't properly been tackled before. Certainly, I'd not seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a classic movie dealing with mental health.
But that was based on a book.
Yes, I know, but it was an original. Well, is that not count as an original movie?
How far are we going with this original?
Yeah, because talking about originality, the original stories, they all come from the same pot, basically. So there's no such thing as originality.
Yeah, but what I meant by original was not based upon an existing medium. So in other words, not based on a stage play, a book, a comic book.
You never said that.
Sequel.
Oh, right. Well, then scrub my entire list then. It's been a decent, I think, time for kind of things based on books. Some things, you've had stuff like No Country for Old Men, or more loose stuff like There Will Be Blood and Guardians of the Galaxy. It's you've had a reasonable kind of decade for things being translated. But I as far as absolute, kind of original screenplays and then brought to screen, it's not been
Inception.
That many.
Can I also throw one out there?
Inception's just popped into my head there. Inception.
That is what I was going to say. That is the best example I can think of.
And
there is, sorry, there's one other one that just springs to mind. It may, as far as I know, this has no book or comic origin. It Follows.
I've still not seen that one.
It's quite good, actually.
Which is a different concept, a different take on the concept of the horror pursuit film, and it scared the bejesus out of me. So what more could you ask for?
Has anybody mentioned Gravity?
Well, not yet, but
I don't know. I think Gravity has a strong original theme, but it does borrow quite heavily from a number of other. What's going. I mean, this goes back to the nature of the question of originality, doesn't it? I mean, in terms of things that are factually based in space, it does try to be semi-accurate. So in that, it then feels a bit like certain other bits and bobs.
It just
Aren't we
degenerated into a
rid-
bit silliness for me. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a great spectacle, but it just got a bit silly.
Well, I mean, spoilers. My theory is that she dies halfway through anyway, and the rest it's the dream sequence of her just dying.
Could be, yeah, could be. I had that thought myself.
I think there's been quite a few decent original low-budget independent movies over the last few years. Things like Birdman, I thought was really good, but Phil's right in terms of big blockbuster budget movies with a big budget. That's very rare, which was why Inception stands out so much, because it was a big budget film with a big star and a big director, and it is quite an intelligent film. It's got a fairly complicated plot, and yet it was also a big hit. It made 800 million. So I think that's the kind of the big budget summer blockbuster film that bucks the trend by not being based upon an existing franchise or a sequel or something else. A completely original film where the studio to take quite a big gamble, really, I think.
You say that, but it's quite similar to a cartoon strip starring Scrooge McDuck. That's all I'll say. Look it up.
Boyhood was pretty good. That was a bit different.
Yeah, I like Boyhood. That was certainly unique, as well as. And I think I'm trying to think of directors who there are certain directors who tend to minor effect. Well, people like Charlie Kaufman and Spike Jonze and Wes Anderson. Their stuff tends to be very much things like Grand Budapest Hotel.
What about Catherine Bigelow, Steve? She's always been out there, done stuff that's a bit more original. Zero Dark 30 pops to mind. That was her last one, wasn't it, really? That she was successful with.
Yeah, and the Hurt Locker before that.
Yep.
It's good.
And you've got to mention the obvious one, which they tried to remake. And
Point Break.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Sorry, Ed, what were you going to say?
I can't get excited about either of those films, but I do appreciate that there is a degree of originality to them. So,
The Coen brothers. They have made some, as Mark just said, they did No Country for Old Men, and obviously they remade True Grit. But quite often they'll come up with stuff that is very original. Yeah,
I've got to say Paul Thomas Anderson falls into that category as well. Not so much in terms of originality of the stories, because they're usually the same type of story told over and over again. It's the way he puts it together and the way he tells the story and the way he shoots it. It's always beautiful to look at as well, and so well edited. Doing stuff like the opening shot of Boogie Nights, where it's just one camera move from a crane outside a nightclub all the way inside, and so little techniques like that then other directors pick up on and start using in their stuff. So I would say he, in terms of originality and in terms of someone who has an influence on how films after that are made, I think he has a big impact. And I think he's underrated as well.
So I guess we're all agreed then. There's lots of original lower budget stuff and certain directors who deliver nice original stuff. But the problem is, I think, when you get to the summer period, like where we are right now, you look at what's coming out over the next 2 months, it's almost entirely sequels, remakes, reboots, or franchise.
Yeah, and of course, if you're trying to be original as well, there's always the whole pretension thing that comes into play. And there's certain directors who definitely fall into that trap.
Yes.
Well, I mean, let's say if you're feeling a bit down about films over the summer, just spend a bit of time listening to new music being released over this. There's some cracking stuff out there. I'm not going to list stuff off because you've all got different interests in different genres. Just spend a little bit of time actually plowing through the new release categories and whichever streaming service happens to be your poison at the time. I promise you there's some really good stuff. Doesn't matter what genre you're interested in. We are having a bit of a golden moment. So make the most of it. Enjoy yourselves.
Thanks for that, Ed. So, do you suffer for CMDB or any of the other conditions that we've discussed in this podcast?
We've discussed originality, Ed's my wife's pupil, streaming services. It's been an action-packed. Well, the clock, as I say this, is an hour and 24. Once Phil's removed the stuff that will have us sued into the next century, I'm sure it's going to be a tight 30 minutes.
Yeah, so. And of course, when it comes to best original films as well, let us know what you think in the last 10 years have been really standout films or standout directors. List them all in the thread that goes with this podcast. But on that bulb shell, see what I did there? Mm-hmm. That's it for the podcast this week. My thanks to Steve Withers,
Grab your stick.
Mark Hodgkinson,
I love this plan. I'm excited to be a part of it.
Ed Selley,
He's a sailor. He's in New York. We get this guy laid, we won't have any trouble.
and Mark Botwright.
My mind is totally blank.
Don't forget.
Yeah, again, Botwright wins.
Yeah, he wins every week he's on. Yeah, I don't know why you guys can try to compete with him.
I don't try to compete. I simply fulfil the obligations as described in the running order.
I don't know. You tried to boast about drummers in obscure films, in obscure locations, you know, and the chap who used to run the post office in the village I grew up in played the bongos in Time Bandits.
Boom.
Skills.
There you go. An ex-neighbour of mine was in that Grayskull Tarzan thing. He was the guy that opened the carriage door for one of the main characters. There you go.
I've got a drummer. I stayed in the house of the Dire Straits drummer, I don't know his name, over New Year in the Cotswolds. There you go.
I'm talking about. My mum used to go with Darth Vader.
He's not a drummer.
So was it a drummer theme going on?
Yeah, we're just drummers, mate.
Were they? Mine wasn't a drummer. It was a neighbour.
I was just thinking about drummers then. Sorry.
You're
Right.
obsessed, Mark. You're obsessed with drummers. Just give it up.
Oh, Whiplash. There's a good one. That's good.
Right,
Oh, yeah,
let's
that's me,
let's step away from the podcast. We've got things to do, and I'm sure our listeners do too.
Yeah, so don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, bookmarkavforums.com for latest reviews, news and video, and of course, leave us those 5-star iTunes ratings with a funny comment. We will read them out in the next couple of podcasts. We're not going to tell you when. It'll be a surprise, so you're going to have to listen in just to see if we do it or not. I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.